like to introduce Dr. Damon Abdi. He is the assistant professor of landscape horticulture at the Hammond Research Center, and hopefully he's going to answer all your questions and show some stuff you didn't know before, right? So thank you.
All right, thank you. First off, thank you everybody for attending. My name is Damon Abdi. I work with the AgCenter at the Hammond Research Station. Today I'm going to talk about some landscape design topics, specifically some of the general functions of the landscape. Now, when you think about what is landscape design, it's a multidisciplinary blend that meshes art, science, and engineering, right? We've got the creative aspect, how we're melding different colors and textures together. We're talking about the science, where we're maintaining the water conditions, the pH, fertilizer. And we're talking about engineering, right? If we're putting a big hedge plant to separate yourself from a neighbor, you're putting a living wall. And that's what's fun about landscape design. And within that, there are 5 broad functions of a landscape. We've got aesthetics. Does it look good? We've got architecture. Is this like a tall pillar in the landscape, or is this going to be like a low-growing feature? How does that create a natural room? Talking about engineering, right? You build a huge wall, a living wall through a hedge. We can think about environmental at all. Does this change the environment? Does it make it a cooler environment? Does it make it a more open, airy environment? And then ecological. Think of that in terms of pollinators. So when it comes to aesthetics, we're thinking about using the landscape to create splashes of color, shapes, and textures to add focus and interest. So here we've got a brilliant red coleus. Your eye goes directly to that. And by using that, you're looking at this sign right here. It stands out with it. You've got this soft green. Green is a calming color to your eye. It makes the landscape calmer in that regard. But you're using plant materials and different features to really create an aesthetic landscape. We can also do this in urban environments by using container planting. So we're right here in New Orleans. If you guys are balcony out, you can still grow container plants. It's not solely about having things in the ground. We also look at, in terms of aesthetics, we look at texture, right? So a lot of times we think solely in terms of flowers, shape, flower color. We can also think about the leaf texture, and this is how they look, but also how they would physically feel if you were to touch it. Now here we've got some elephant ears here. If you go to touch an elephant ear, it's very, very soft. It's got that fine texture. This right here is an agave. I would not recommend touching that or walking into that. The texture also looks more jagged and pointy, and it certainly feels that way. So this is how texture can really impact the aesthetics. Similarly, in texture, we use a range of grasses in the landscape. So with this, we can have this nice soft feel that looks soft to the eye, but it looks comfortable to run your hand through. When we talk about architecture, the function of architecture, that's using the landscape to create rooms outdoors, right? We think of ground covers. You have ground cover plants, that's your carpet, that's your floors. Turf grass, that's your floors. Talk about walls. I like to think of the living feature of trunks in the landscape. We've got crepe myrtles here. We've got those nice vertical patterns. These are single stemmed for the most part, and that creates these walls. And then the space between is windows that you can look through. Similarly, we've got magnolias right here that have that big wall, and it hangs over and creates a ceiling as well. So we're thinking about how different tree forms, different plant forms, create this living, breathing room. And within that, even within a single species, you might have different forms of plants. So vitex or chast tree. This one is more upright, airy, and that is the form of that, the architecture of that, where this one is more mounding and dense. You want this as a hedge between a neighbor, not this so much. This might be something in an open field that you really want to enjoy and have it be more unified with the landscape. Let's look at this. What architectural components do you see here? The ones that I see is this pathway, this physical floor. So remember, in your landscape, it's not all about plants, it's about the interaction between everything. It's about your hardscapes, it's about your patios, things of that nature. I also see some hostas here, right? And these are going to serve kind of as the floor a little bit. These pictures were taken up from my time in Michigan, so some of the plants are going to be swapped over. But the thing about architecture is it all coincides. Here we've got trees that create this wall. It separates ostensibly what is a street right there. You get to see it, block it from view of that. Here we've got a pergola right here. Pergola is a nice addition to the landscape, and that creates a ceiling. So we've got all these different components in a landscape that can really frame individual rooms. When we talk about engineering in a landscape, we're thinking about plantings, fences, walls. Notice how I said living fences a handful of times already. But also what we're thinking about things is that can be able to control the environment. This is at the Hammond Research Station. This is our public parking lot. On the other side of that hedge, we've got our equipment farms. We've got tools. We have a fantastic crew out there that works to maintain our materials all the time. And what we have here is this hedge that can separate the public parking lot and also block out the sounds from when air compressors are running, when you're fixing things up. You're using these for not only aesthetics, you're using them to block sound. You're using them to block views. You're using them to block foot traffic from crossing over into that other area. That's engineering. Another example of engineering is using ground covers, right? Some nice, dense, low-growing plants. How can you engineer a landscape with ground covers? How are you controlling the landscape with ground covers? Well, ground covers can help to reduce erosion if you've got hilly areas or a lot of rainfall. And then they can also assist in water infiltration, right? This creates a more living, active area than just compacted, bare soil. That's how ground covers can control the environment. Now here's something that can trip a lot of people up. We mentioned environmental landscaping and we mentioned ecological landscaping. Now, those sound very similar, but there is a distinct difference. And the biggest difference is environmental. Think of it as how it affects us as humans. So in this picture right here, what do we see? We see a parking lot. We see this open, expansive space, and then we see these trees right here. This is at the Hammond Research Station. What are these trees? These are elm trees. Now think about some of the features of elm trees. Their growth habit. Very upright, kind of base-like, and then they spread out. They're not low-growing. There's not going to be branches going down and reaching into the cars, right? So with this upright habit, what this does is it creates this ceiling, this high ceiling that filters some of that light out, which cools down this parking lot. So when individuals come and park here, they're not going to have the sun beating down on their car the entire day. You're using these plants to limit the amount of light and heat and create an enjoyable area. So I like to think of it as using landscaping to create air conditioning outside. So that's how I remember it. So think this is also from the Hammond Research Station. We have a number of large, beautiful magnolias that create this dense, thick shade. Now, on a hot summer day, when you're out eating your lunch, you do not probably want to be in the sun more than you have to, but you still probably want some fresh air. In this case, you're using this heavy shaded area to welcome people, to create an environment that people want to sit and feel comfortable in and eat their lunch. And we've got benches out there. Can anybody in the crowd guess where I'm going with this?
Cover it up.
Okay, so we're covering up. Why would we want to cover it up?
This is ugly.
Okay.
Because we don't want to overheat too.
Exactly. So we hear two things. We hear that this image, and if you can't see this image, this is a propane tank outside our building. There was two things I heard. I heard we want to cover it up because it's unsightly, and then we also want to be here. We want to keep it cool. Now, what can we see here that can keep this covered up and out of access? We've got these concrete bars that are going to keep people from parking near there and hopefully not seeing it. We've got these beautiful azaleas that block it out of sight and out of view. And we've got some tall trees here. And we create this shaded area. Now, propane, you don't want to have that sitting out in the sun. I don't think there's anything good that can come from it. You create a secluded, cool area that's protected from the elements. Also, with all this here, we got concrete bars here, we got large trunks. In the event of a hurricane, it's nice to have a little bit of coverage there that's going to be solid. Was that always the intent all along? I don't know, but I'm sure it's an added benefit sometimes. All right, now we're talking about ecological. When we're talking about ecological landscapes, we're thinking about landscapes designed to foster a healthy environment, right? So when we think about environmental, think about it a little bit selfishly. You want yourself to be cool. You want yourself to have that comfortable environment. Ecological, this is where you're thinking about, biota, where you're thinking about pollinators, right? So you've got plants like camellia here that are going to have very profuse blooms. These orange blooms are very nice, and it doesn't do justice to the monarch butterfly that is on it, but it attracts a lot of pollinators. This serves as food for these pollinators. That's ecological. What else do we have here? We've got calicarpa, right? We've got beautyberry. Beautyberry has some excellent purple clusters of fruit, and those serve as a food source for your native wildlife. So it's ways to create a healthier environment. We can also do so in terms of rain gardens. If you have an area that's going to be swampy, sometimes it's good just to lean into it. Go for plants that are going to enjoy some of those wet environments. Louisiana iris is a great plant in those kind of conditions. Also think about ecological in terms of wetland restoration. Things like that. Choosing plants that work well to sustain and maintain the environment in a good way. Now those are the 5 functions of landscape design. But another concept I want to show you all about is landscape character. Now this is a highly subjective thing. It's about how does a landscape make you feel? What feelings do you get from entering a landscape? And then using those 5 functions that we discussed, that's going to help us establish landscape character. So let's go through a few images right here. What do we see here? We see a giant, large, live oak, right? What do we see here? Think about architecture, engineering, environmental, aesthetic, ecological. Does anybody have any of these things that they want to throw out there? Well, I'll start it off. Architectural, what do I see? I see this giant live oak. It's a very majestic plant with these massive branches there. This creates a very aesthetic look in a number of ways. First off, you see something like that when you're driving by, it's going to catch your eye. It's aesthetic. Draws you to the front sign. Architectural, it's got that very high branching point that it creates that wall and it creates that ceiling. You've got all this space under here and you can see how much shade it casts. It casts all over this area. So I see those 2 features of that. Aesthetic, architectural, engineering, I don't see it too much in that. Environmental, if you sit under there, you're going to be more comfortable and shaded. Ecological, nothing really too much about that quite yet. What do we see here? What is the landscape function of this area? And for those in the back, this area is a packed urban environment filled with benches, and we got some tall trees growing over the top. What's the landscape functions, engineer?
Shade.
I heard shade. That's our environmental microclimate, right? Our environmental, our AC. You're in an urban area, you're in an urban heat island. You don't want to be sitting there and sweating down there whether you're working outside or in an office. You want to be cool, calm, and collected. And this, having these high trees here, are going to create enough shade that it's going to be interesting. I also see architecture. You don't see these buildings, you see these tall walls and this ceiling. This creates an outdoor room without even leaving the city. Landscape character, for me, I find it relaxed. I'm shaded. I'm in connection with nature. I also feel socially stimulating, which can be a good or bad thing. If you're in the mood to go catch up with a bunch of people, this looks like a pretty relaxing place. You know, when you're friends from another office, when you're friends from stopping downtown, that could be a really enjoyable feature. Now let's think about this area. Does anyone want to call out how this area makes them feel? And there's no wrong answer.
Welcome.
Welcome. I hear welcome, and that's what I also hear. I see a path that seems purposeful, it seems meaningful. It's taking you the long way around. You get to enjoy the colors, and then it's inviting. You've got that table tucked away that you can look out over this expansive area. Something you walk around, you see a friend there, you're going to want to sit and stop for a while. You don't feel rushed and cold or informal. That's the landscape character I see in that. Yes, you have a question?
Is a paved surface like that, is that like a permeable surface so that like water could still seep through the cracks to get to the ground?
So typically when you're building a hardscape like that, you're gonna put polymer sand in that's gonna keep it from draining directly in. But there is work in permeable pavers to get those more commonplace. So it all depends on the hardscape. But the key part is the direction and the flow of these and the feeling it makes. The material is largely an afterthought sometimes when it comes to this stage of landscape design. How about this? What do we see here as our landscape function? Remember, architecture, engineering, environmental. Other things we see: aesthetic, ecological. I see a couple things. First off, what we see here is a public area in a park, and we see a green roof, and we also see this very vegetative, natural kind of look into that. So what kind of functions do I see? Well, I see ecological and I see engineering, right? So ecological, I think this is pretty straightforward. We got a green roof, right? We're putting more things for pollinators, more things for a vibrant environmental area. And we've got, in Becky, we've got plenty of outdoor plants that are really going to generate this natural biota for the environment and the wildlife. What I also see is engineering. So perhaps this area gets a substantial amount of rainfall. And this way is a method for it to attenuate some of those volumes of water, so you're engineering the built environment to solve some sort of issue. In this case, it could be rainwater. The landscape character for me is I feel one with nature. I recognize that I'm in a human area and I've got very close connection with nature. So this picture is from a park. You want to feel like you're in nature, and this helps blend that landscape character in. And I also feel comfortable and soft. I mean, you see this very soft texture of all these wildflowers. It doesn't seem harsh, rigid. That's my interpretation. Does anybody out there want to call out how this landscape makes them feel?
I think it feels very natural. I wish they had painted the doors a more brown color.
Yes.
To blend with them. But it's very beautiful, very Hobbit-like.
Yeah. It's got that entire aesthetic to it. So that's another landscape function. So we think about how these are, and that's the beauty of it. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's how you interpret it. How about this? What do we see here?
Formality.
You see a lot of formality, right? We see one of these very neatly maintained things. How would this make you feel necessarily? Some people like that order. Some people like that heavily manicured garden. Some people might feel a little stressed out. Maybe they want to connect with nature in a less formal way. So you see these different elements of it. What do I see? When I look at the 5 broad functions, I see architecture, right? We're using a lot of very purposeful pathways. A lot of pathways that seem extremely planned out. This wasn't just going out there with a spray painter and marking your way. This was to take some serious tape measurement time. That's how some of I look at it. That's probably the best way to look at it. You all see these hedges here, right? Engineering, hedges. You're keeping people out from crossing right over. All right, and this, the landscape function, what do we think it is? I see architectural and I see engineering. So we see a path here that goes around, and this is built just simple concrete. It's nothing fancy, but its purpose is to get you from point A to point B. But it's a little bit more welcoming. Think about it in terms of landscape character. This is a straight line. When I see a straight line like that, I'm thinking get to point A, point B, and just do A step. When I see this, it invites me to come take my time a little bit. So that's how I feel about that. When I see the architecture, I see these tall trees right here. I see this wall. It's telling me that I can look out over there, but it's not inviting me to walk across that area. If I was to cut across that area, I'd just cut right across that turf. So there's that architecture, that wall, that ceiling that you see on that side, and it's keeping me out from going that way, but it's inviting me still this way. So when I say the landscape character, I use the word purposeful. You're going right there, but it's a little bit more welcoming and it's simple. That's just a slight little flair to it without trying too hard. All right, what do we see here? We've got a kind of unique picture. I love using this image. This is from an office park. And either function or character. Anyone want to call them out before I reveal them?
So it's like you could sit up along the wall.
So you can sit along the wall, okay? I see that. Anybody else?
Softens the severity of the building.
It softens the severity of the building. So in this image right here, we've got these islands in the middle of this concrete area with green turf built up, and then you've got these willow trees that are hanging over, these weeping willows that, to me, what I look at this is the contrast between these islands and that cold hardscape right there, and I see these islands as kind of welcoming. You can sit on that ledge. You could even climb up there and sit on it and get a little bit higher view. But to me, you know what that looks like to me? It looks like an island somewhere on the beach, right? You're in the office all day, you're gonna get a chance to feel like you're an island on the beach. But what's the function? The functions that I see is architectural. We got our walls right here. We got these nice walls, and we got a little bit of ceiling with those weeping willows. And what that does is softening the landscape. It makes it a little less cold and normal. And that is a big feature for that. But also it's environmental microclimate, right? So it's nice and cool under there. It's a little reprieve from the hot sun. So to me, I feel like that would be a great place to sit and relax. And that's why I feel as a landscape character, serene. It's simple. We're not overwhelmed with flowers here. This is pretty easy to maintain. You got 2 trees and some turf. As a landscaper, it's pretty easy to do that. And the big thing in that is that it's serene, simple, and like I mentioned, it feels like a tropical island, right? That's art, that's science, that's engineering. What about something like this, right? To me, this isn't that exciting, right? You probably pass something like this 100 times a week. What do I see in this? Ecological, environmental, engineering. I see a range of them. First off, I also see aesthetics, and it sounds kind of funny to some of y'all, but think about it. This could just be a simple concrete strip. It's separated into 2 parking areas. Instead, we've got a living area. That's a good thing, right? I see that. I see engineering. We see this area between here. You can't just walk right over it. You're going to know if you've driven too far. So it creates those 2 separate areas in the parking side. I see engineering because you're attenuating to stormwater. I see ecological because I'm sure there's a whole lot of things living in there. So you get this whole range of benefits just from something so simple. How about something like this? We see just a gravel pad outside there. Now, first many of you are wondering, why would somebody just simply want to do that? Well, you'll probably also notice in this image there's a fire hydrant out there, right? So think about it. In one of those worst case scenarios, if you're out responding to those calls and you have to get access to it, it's probably a pretty nice thing to have a perfect location for that. How does this actually fit into the landscape design? Think about it. This is just gravel here. I thought we were all here for plant sales. No? Well, it's part of the landscape. What do I see? I see aesthetics. You've got these flowing, curvy lines here, right? When we talk about those curvy lines, it's more welcoming. It's not just a geometric park it and stow it thing. It's actually having a little fun to it. I love the contrast between that turf and those rocks.
It also looks like parking spots.
And it looks like parking spots, so perhaps these individuals entertain quite often. What would that be of those 5 rock functions? Engineering. Because you're modifying the environment to solve an issue or do something. So you got people able to park up there. I think it's aesthetic. It could also be engineering too. Perhaps neighbors are quite often walking their dogs right around there, and dogs have to go to the bathroom. I don't think you don't have to worry about your turf there. Hopefully they bring it back. But there's a lot of values to it. Could it also have things to do with ecological? Maybe there's a lot of runoff that comes down there and it intercepts it. There's a rain drain under it. Things to consider when it comes to these kind of images. How about this? What is it?
Oak leaf hydrangea.
It's a oak leaf hydrangea, hydrangea portfolio, and it's grown out of a gate. Where am I going with this? Architecture, right? So what do gates do? They separate rooms and they create these different environments, right? How about engineering? If you have to walk through that gate all the time, you gotta open and close it. What's this oak leaf hydrangea doing here? It's holding it open. right? So that gate's permanently open. So at that point, it's really just an ornamental piece. It's not really for any purpose, but it's probably aesthetic, isn't it? Yeah, I would say it's pretty aesthetic too. So you get these things, right? You get these different interactions between the landscape. How does it make me feel with the character? It makes me feel like the door is always open, because ostensibly it is always open. You got that open, you're not gonna mess it up by pulling it off every time. So that's something you have to keep in mind. How does something so simple like this in a small space contribute to the landscape character? Things like this. You're outside in an urban environment, you got a storefront out there, you get a whole bunch of flowers out there, and that's going to bring in customers. That's going to make them just generally more interested in coming to your store. What do we have here in this image? What we have here is we've got a bunch of Cleone, right? So we're all familiar with Cleones, right? Well, some of you aren't, maybe there's some here. But we've got these bright, flashy colors out here, right? Those colors attract a lot of attention. What else do we see in this image?
Wall. Hedge.
We see a wall, yep. So we see a hedge right there. What would that hedge, what's the purpose of that hedge in our 5-rod function?
To lead you.
To lead you, okay. So we've got that. How does the way these hedges are shaped make you feel? How is the architecture of it? Are these wildly growing, or are these very well manicured?
Very orderly.
Orderly, right? So some people are going to like that more wild growth. Some people are going to prefer that. But then if you have that, it feels more direct. You see this straight line there. It feels like you're, like I say, you're going from point A to point B. That's how I feel about those straight lines there. But it's also giving you a little bit of interest on the way too.
I think it's a juxtaposition of the straight line and the order, and then behind it is very wild, so it just feels like it's keeping it at bay a little bit.
So it's almost like, you know, if you encounter, you know, an animal out in the wild, are you going to feel a little bit better, or if it's behind a glass pane? Yeah, I'm sure you would. And that's basically what it is. It's that wild, you know, just, you know, all randomized growth versus that very important thing. It's the contrast. And the thing is, the beauty of this is you could do this with boxwood. You could do this with a Yukon holly. It doesn't necessarily matter what plant it is. You could do this with any number of things, salvias, any number of different plants, and you get these different kinds of options to play with and create it. It's all about what you're going for. It's about the intention of the design. Here's a great example. We've got 2 walls right here. Now, if this was your yard, show of hands, how many people would want the one on the left? Okay. And how many people would like the one on the right? So we got a little bit of a mix, but there's no wrong answer to it. That's the beauty of it. What are the different things that come with these 2 types of walls? So let's go through this first picture here. This first picture, we've got a slightly winding path, and then we've got this hard brick wall. But what we have here is this low-growing plant right here. Now what's that serving? Remember our architecture, we talk about floors, walls, ceilings, etc. That's kind of that floor. You've got that nice difference in color and in texture from the floor to the wall. So that adds a lot to it. The bricks in this one are kind of light, they're more faded. That lighter color, you know, just has that a different feel to it. And what's nice about this is it's juxtaposed, you've got these sweet potatoes trailing over it, right? So this softens the hardscape feature. This creates a softer architecture, and it also can harbor all other sorts of critters up there, and you got the different colors going over that point. So this creates a softer area, and it's a little bit more enjoyable as well. We also see that there's some grasses here, so we got a nice texture on that. This would probably take a good bit of maintenance, right? You don't want it to get overgrown. And that's one of the key considerations, right? When you're putting in these landscapes, you've got to be very, very sure about what you have to do not only to install them, but what you have to do to install them, keep them going in year 2, year 3, etc., in perpetuity. So that's something key to keep in mind. What's the benefit of this one? When I see this job as a maintenance job, I see that there's, you don't have anything on those walls. This wall feels very purposeful. It feels like you're separating architecturally that room, engineering as well, and you're keeping that wall separate. Now, this one has plants, this one doesn't, but this one has that striking red color, right? You got those beautiful red bricks on it that just stick out quite a bit. And you've got that really white mortar there, so you get those lines, right? It's those little bits of architecture that really make it stick out even more. And then what we also juxtapose that with is we've got boxwoods right there. So what do we see about those boxwoods?
The curve.
They're curved, right? So we got a curvy line. What else do we see about them? The way they're pruned. We see it's got that rounded look to it, right? So what I see with this in terms of the architecture is you see these lines, they're slightly curved and the plants follow, which is nice. But these are very geometric, they're square, they're rigid, those outlines. And your eye follows that, and that's interesting. But you have this rounded pruning, and what does that do? That slows down your eyes. It creates that contrast between this and this. And it's going to slow your eyes as you're following it, and it's going to just change the way. It feels, to me, less formal. If it's all just geometric, that's that. This adds a little bit of fun to it. What's the good part about the maintenance on that? It's not too bad. It's a lot less involved in terms of long-term time. And what's good about that is a relatively simple kind of installation. Here, we've probably got, 6 to 12 different varieties of plants out there. Here, we've got, maybe 1 or 2. There's probably ground cover right on the edge. But the thing is, you can meld these styles to make a little bit of blend and really fit it both within your budget, within your goal, and what you really want to do. How about something like this? Now, I've led us through a couple, so we got to call out architectural, engineering, environmental, aesthetic.
All.
Yep, okay, yeah, we see a little bit of all. So, first thing you see is you see this wall there, right? You see this big, imposing wall. Now, something like that is kind of pretty set in stone, pun intended, and it keeps you from crossing over. So it feels a little bit informal, doesn't it? Or a little bit unwelcoming. But perhaps that might be the most welcoming person in the world. You don't know that. What they do is, with their landscape, you would think that they are the nicest person in the world and they want you to come in. So what we see is a very, very rich palette of different plants out here. How many people like that? Right? If that wasn't there, would you feel comfortable stopping at that house? Yeah, you'd probably be a little bit scared, right? But something like that is very welcoming, it's very vibrant. What does that also tell you about perhaps what they want out of a garden? That looks very custom made. It looks like they probably put a lot of personal time into it and a lot of nuance. Perhaps it's even been there for a long time. And that's kind of their little pride to show off. The landscape character to that makes me feel like it's been around for a while. Like it's really almost a landmark, and it makes me feel welcome. And I want to see it. I love the colors. We got some goldenrod up there. We've got a bunch of different things, some salvias, and we got a whole palette of color. But it also has some of that feeling to it that feels a little bit intriguing. You've got this vine covering parts of it, so it seems very, very purposely maintained, but also a little bit natural, right? You don't have those geometric looks. That is the best way to really change the narrative of this particular landscape. Something like this. These two images put a vastly different landscape character for me. Would you all be inclined to agree?
Yes.
I see a lot of heads nodding. So this is from the same place. On the left image, we see a courtyard with a closed gate in the distance. Call out some of the features that you see of this left image specifically. Architectural, right? What kind of architecture do we see? We see that straight line. That's very purposeful. It's saying get from point A to point B. Other aesthetics things, do we really see a whole lot of aesthetics in that?
Not trying to distract you with anything.
It's not trying to distract you, exactly. And that might very well be the intent. But we see a lot of green, we see a lot of ground covers. We don't see anything that's really inviting you. To me, I see a path at the end of a gate. It's basically like saying, you can rush over here, but you're not welcome. Yeah, I don't think I really want to walk down that path, right? There isn't a whole lot there, but it's kind of peculiar because that gate has those panels in it, right? And with this wall in the back and with this gate, we've got a very separated room. That's architectural, right? We're keeping that area there. Could be engineering. Maybe you want to funnel people down there. Because there is a gate. There's got to be some way that you've got to let people in. So we think about that. But in the distance behind that, we see these pink and whites in there. So we see some aesthetics that's really going to want to draw you in. Now, when that gate's open, how does that affect the landscape character? You feel more welcome, right? You see those open gates, and you want to walk in there. And then when you get a little bit closer, you see that perhaps there's a lot more there that is very welcoming. You see this flower bed here. You see these containers here. You see a lot of interest. They just needed to open up a little bit. And that's what they do, right? So imagine this is a public garden somewhere, right? Now, let's say you wanted to rent the space out for some event, and you wanted your own purposeful place for yourself. You've got the architecture of the landscape that separates and creates these rooms. Now, if you're an invited guest, the gate's always open. You're welcome in there. It's a very welcoming and enjoyable place. But the gate's closed, the landscape's not there to really invite you. It's kind of sending a very tacit disinvite. Maybe not that strong. But the fact remains that you can really use the landscape to really change the character, to really accomplish certain goals. So that's why one of my favorite things to do, and it's very fortunate, especially in this city, you can go around to all the different beautiful landscapes and try to analyze this. Ask yourself, what are they going for here? What kind of landscape character do they want to accomplish, and things of that nature. All right, we also see a pathway here that goes around, and we've got this bright, vibrant color here. And this really pops out and really creates this very visceral curved line. Remember, curved lines, I've given a talk on curved lines from Master Gardeners a couple weeks ago. So if any of you all are in attendance, you probably remember this. But those curved lines slow you down, they welcome you more. And the real purpose of this is to really call out that very strong line. And then we got this beautiful mix of all different kinds of things over there. So we get to play with all these different colors. We get to play with all these different parts of the landscape that really can change the character. For this, I see a very, very hard line. It's probably a place I haven't been at. It's screaming that line at me. I don't know about that. And then also other lines that you see can be created with rocks, right? So you got this rock here, and then you've got this rudbeckia here protecting some of this canvas grass right there. Why would they put these rocks right here?
To contain.
To contain. So that would be engineering. Exactly. So you've got this rock border right there that can keep the grass from spreading in, and then when you're maintaining, you're weed whacking around it, you're able to do this job more quickly, right? So perhaps this is a really large garden. They've got to pay a crew out there, and if they can change their installation so that they can maintain it in a quarter of the time, that just makes sense for them. And also, it looks really good. You get those rocks, it delineates things, it creates something that's really formal. Now, one of my favorite things to do in the landscape is to put a good edge in, right? So in this image, they got a flower bed, and they just put a nice line edge in. I don't care who you are, you've got to admit that it's very clean to be able to have that. And with that, you create this very, very defined line. It's formal, it looks very clean cut, which it is, of course. But also you've got this inviting curve right here in the aesthetic for it, right? In terms of the architecture. It slows you down. It welcomes you enough to want to sit at one of these benches. So it seems like it's very purposeful in the sense that it's clean cut and ready and available for the public. Now, if this area was a little bit more overgrown, less manicured, I would be inclined to think that it might be someone's go-to spot. They like to just get away from the hustle and bustle and sit there by themselves. That's the way I would interpret it. With something that's more manicured like this, I just kind of look at it as more inviting and more for the general public. So it's how you manage the landscape that can really help the character. The last image I'm going to show you would be this one here. So there's a few things that I really like to see in this. I see architecture in this image, right? We see the different rocks. We see these large, coarse stones, and this creates this base that is built up, right? What other broad functions could this be? This could also be engineering. It's a stable, structurally stable, strong base to support flagpoles. I see aesthetics. I see sweet potatoes that are softening these jagged edges. It creates a softer, more enjoyable kind of landscape, and it adds a big splash of color to it. And then we also see architectures with flagpoles. And then the landscape character for this is very proud. I mean, we've got the flags displayed, we've got a very prominent display. That's the landscape character that I would see from it. So for every landscape that I get the privilege to go see, it's good to kind of look a little bit deeper. At the very least, it's a good way to pass the time. Anyway, thank you for attending my talk. My name is Dr. Damon Abdi. I'm with the LSU AgCenter at the Hammond Research Station, Assistant Professor of Landscape Horticulture. And if you have any questions, I'd like to get them. Yes.
I was curious about you had a picture that had